Hey, what's up? Welcome to another episode of our After Hours Screen Talk series. I'm Jesse. I'm here with my brother Dan, and in today's video, we're going to discuss the horror film Bones and All, which stars Timothée Chalamet and Taylor Russell. It's a cannibal romance love story directed by the Italian filmmaker Luca Guadagnino, who I mainly know as the director behind the 2018 remake of the cult horror film Suspiria. And the plot revolves around this troubled teenager played by Taylor Russell. She's living with her dad, I think, in Maryland and going to school there. But she has this dark secret, which you discover is that she's a cannibal, which in the movie they're referred to as eaters. The film follows her character across the country, mainly in the Midwest, and she meets this young man, Lee, played by Timothée Chalamet, and discovers that he's also an eater like herself. And then romance blossoms between them, and we follow these two characters on this odyssey, through the 1980s Midwest. I was very impressed by the cinematography and how the cinematography, the locations are just like as much a character in the movie as the characters themselves.
I think that the characters were great. I think the actors were all great. But I do think that the cinematography and the locations were actually the real main characters of the film. They're the reason that I like the film as much as I do and had the reaction that I did to it. Not to discount, I think the strong work that the two leads and the other actors do, but I do think that the way the film is shot and the locations and the quality of all of that together is so striking that it really does kind of take over the film.
The importance of that kind of landscape and sense of alienation, desolation that's so associated with those kinds of landscapes, American landscapes, and really make it a theme in the movie.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of a journey too. The other thing I thought was really resonant about the film is that it's a road film, and I was really struck by how Guadagnino clearly, I think, was addressing his film to cinematically fluent spectators who are aware of Hollywood's cinematic tradition, and specifically the recurrence and the resonance of the idea of the American landscape. Most iconically, the frontier in the West, of course, but here you get the South, the Midwest. I think at one point they're in Nevada, actually, so they do make it into the West. But I'm thinking about a comedy like It Happened One Night, which is a classic road film. I'm thinking about a film like Badlands, Terrence Malick's. I think Badlands and Terrence Malick, the cinema of Terrence Malick, definitely seems like a pretty explicit frame of reference for the film. Even though Guadagnino's project here is different than the one in Badlands. But just the idea that it's about time and it's about progress and it's about the kind of nomadic searching, longing, loneliness that typifies one of the really enduring experiences of American life and the American environment.
Another movie I think about is Paris, Texas. You follow a similar drifter in that who has that similar longing and sense of displacement and longing for a sense of home that he's never able to actually actualize or realize in the same way. These characters have that incredible longing for love and connection and community. You would never think you would humanize a cannibal. But this film manages to do it in such a way and also pose a question, can, even if you're a cannibal, can cannibals still find love? And when your whole, um, you know, life urge is around eating people, can you still find love and connection in that situation?
I'm really interested by the role of cannibalism in the film. I mean, of course, it makes perfect sense that Guadagnino would make a film like this, being a gay man and probably growing up experiencing these kinds of feelings of being on the margins and not accepted and other, and finding comfort in maybe films like Suspiria that he eventually remade. So it's of course striking, but also not surprising that he would humanize the monsters as much as he does,
Yeah.
and treat monstrosity as something worthy of more than just disgust and abhorrence. And as you say, though, I mean, really a great deal of work done in that direction. I mean, unless they're actively eating someone, and then we have these striking scenes of cannibalism, we're really not scared of or disgusted by the characters. I think that we really do identify with them, and their story speaks to us. They do just seem like figures who want what people want. They want connection, they want love, they want a community. They want some kind of life in this desolate American landscape.
So there's a scene where Timothée Chalamet's character Lee finds this carnival worker. There's this whole homoerotic scene in the movie where he's seducing this carnival worker, and then they eat him, and then later discover that he's a married man and has a family, and so queerness is becomes associated with these characters. They could be seen right as queer characters, but that was interesting to find that after they learned that they had eaten a married man, then that made a difference. They weren't worried about me. And then the thing is, they weren't concerned about eating a gay man, but a married man with kids. That was a code that they shouldn't have broken.
Yeah, well, I think I mean, it's a recurring pattern, right? Whenever you have these narratives that focus on monsters that become humanized, it's not uncommon for those characters to have those kinds of moral codes, right? And I think one of the things that the film's doing, which should be very familiar, I think, to somebody who's familiar with this subgenre, is it's raising the question of the proximity between the cannibal code and the human code.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, for instance, of when Timothée Chalamet kills and cannibalizes that drunk in the drugstore.
Mhm.
He and Marin later go and do what becomes a pattern for them. They go to the homes of the people they've cannibalized and reside there for a little while. So they have a little nomad home for a bit and pretend that they have a residence. That becomes a very touching idea, a touching thing. But I was struck when they get into the interior of this guy's house. You've got pornographic images on the walls. You've got the remains of a pizza. So really, I mean, that guy, he's an eater himself. Um,
Huh.
he just doesn't
Yeah.
eat people, right? So there's this idea that like there's this this taboo, kind of dark taboo aspect to his appetites and the way he eats and what he eats. It's just that it's more socially acceptable. It can be integrated into the human American experience, and theirs can't.
That's a good point. Like, what's accepted monstrosity and what's not accepted. And the film really explores that. And um, the character of Sully, when he comes into play, he's a veteran in the cannibal business. He's a representation of what Lee and Marin will become. He's a character similar to them. He's experiencing the same things, the same sense of loneliness, deep longing, and alienation. And this but predatory hunger for connection and love. And his prey is Marin. He's hunting her down and stalking her throughout the entire movie. He takes a trophy out of all his kills. He has this rope he's made out of hair, and he takes great pleasure, it seems, and enjoyment and kind of sadistic enjoyment out of it, out of the actual killing. And I think he's representing something too, about that Lee and Marin don't want to accept about themselves.
I think his character is interesting to me because like he eventually is the film's villain, the kind of unremitting monster, right? We don't by the end of the film we don't experience the same feelings of ambivalence regarding him as we do to the two leads, obviously. But that changes. It's not always like that for me. When we first meet Sully, I think that what's striking about him is that he's driven by the same things that the two leads are. He's driven by the desire for companionship and company. But because of his age and because of how long he's been doing it and living the eater life that he has to lead, he's been driven kind of insane by the loneliness. He's become touched by it. So the speaking in the third person, I mean, he's alienated, he's lonely, and his first encounters with Marin are always weird and uncomfortable because he is so eccentric seeming. But I mean, I don't get the initial impression that he takes some sort of sadistic pleasure, for instance. Like the first time we see him and then Marin feed together, it's this woman who eventually dies of, I think, cardiac arrest or something. So he waits for her to die. He doesn't actively torture or torment or kill her or anything like that. And he references the idea that he doesn't kill unless he really needs to, and that seems to play out exactly like he says, right? He's somebody who is just looking for opportunities to engage in eating because it's something he needs to do. And then he offers her, you can run with me for as long as you like, but of course she doesn't take him up on that. And that's when his character transforms and does become predatory. He starts stalking her, and then, of course, at the end, he is the film's villain. He goes over the edge
Yeah.
and becomes the kind of monstrous figure that the film otherwise lacks.
I said he had, some sadistic pleasure, in the kills, and the way that's presented at first is very kind of casual. And I think his age has something to do with it. He's been doing this for so long. There's this kind of bored indifference after murdering someone and eating their corpse. There's no emotional reaction. The lack of reaction is very unsettling. He's with Marin in this moment after they've eaten the corpse together, and he tells her, "Listen, we can bond together as long as you want." So there's that sense that this has been like a sexual experience for him,
Well,
and
eventually, I think that's explicitly the case, right? I mean, he's like I said, I mean, his character eventually does become that monster. But my heart really goes out to that character, and I think that it's a brilliant performance by Rylance. I think he's the reason I have the experience I do.
yeah,
I feel a great sense of compassion for him up until the end when we find out that not only is he attacking Marin, but he's also cannibalized Lee's younger sister. And that's that's a
yeah.
line that you can't uncross, obviously. But before that, he's just a terribly lonely man who's been driven insane by loneliness. And I feel a great deal of compassion for him on that level. And like
Yeah,
you said, he's what Lee and Marin could become eventually, right? Because that's the life that they're facing. He's a creaturely character. I think that it's a great performance because it's so creaturely. Like the really kind of like pronounced and sensual way that he does something as little as sniffing. Like when he sniffs, his whole face scrunches up. When he smiles, his whole face or laughs, his whole face scrunches up. So there's this idea that there's the kind of microphysics of his creatureliness really kind of come out in the performance.
and when you learn about Lee's backstory, he grew up in Kentucky. It turned out his dad, again with father figures, his dad was an eater as well, and like tried to eat him, and he managed to escape and then kill his dad, and then he ate his dad. He shares this story with Marin, and when he's describing it and revisiting it, he says like he got a high out of eating his dad. And I think that's the part that is um, they don't want to accept that they take pleasure in this.
The necessity of cannibalism, this is something that eaters need to do, but the nature of that need is not particularly well defined, and I think it's ambiguous on purpose. But I think the whole idea of enjoyment, of forbidden enjoyment, is something that was not as developed or explored in the film as I expected it to be. When I first heard about the film and, had seen a preview and didn't know much about it, I thought that this was going to be about cannibalism as a forbidden kink. That this is something that, that Chalamet and or I should say Lee and Marin are cannibals because it's a kink, because there's a sexual fetish. Um, the film plays around with the idea of enjoyment and really suggests it here and there, but the idea that it's a necessity is unclear. We see them eating other kinds of food. So ostensibly, they don't need to eat meat in order to eat people in order to prevent starvation. So if it's not starvation, then what need does it precisely fill? And that's kind of unspoken. Um, but there are decisive places where the idea of enjoyment and the idea that it might be actually a kind of sexualized kink comes into play. So the scene that you described with Lee, about his dad, but also the fact that when Lee seduces the carnival worker and eventually kills him, he waits until the guy is on the exact moment of orgasm to slit his throat. So the idea, I think it's strongly implied that the man's orgasm coincides with his death, and that the
Yeah.
slitting of the throat is timed by Lee to occur at about the time that he's experiencing release. And
Yeah.
so again, we have this idea that there's proximity between the violence and the eating of the cannibalism and um, and sex and sexuality.
And it plays into and leans into some themes of vampirism. I mean, the vampire is a very erotic sexual myth. I mean, the kind of way a vampire feeds, it's a very kind of sexual kind of feeding. There's always that underpinning to it.
I think it's interesting. We talk about loneliness. That's very much loneliness and longing are the dominant kind of emotional threads of the film. Something you said earlier, though, about the fact that this film is set at an earlier time in American history seems really significant to me. And that's the other thing that's strange about this film is that even though loneliness and longing and desolation are dominant, there's also beauty. And there's also this kind of sensual connection to place and space. Um, and even though we were surrounded by these desolate American spaces, these kind of small ghost towns that have experienced manufacturing booms, but then, you know, fallen in when the boom busts. Um,
Yeah.
there's a beauty and a connection and a kind of resonating ethos of American small town life and a piece of the American experience that's still there, but is ghostly and passing away. Um, and on that level, Guadagnino refers to, he wanted the music to be elegiac in nature.
Yeah.
And so Reznor and Ross um, bring that home with this kind of retro bluegrassy soundtrack. And
Yeah.
the whole idea is that, it's almost nostalgic at points. We're nostalgic for the rotophones. We're nostalgic for the chintzy floral wallpaper. Well, we're nostalgic for these little backwoods towns that you just drive through and that don't have really anything going for them.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it's all on the periphery and the margins. This is the part of America that's pushed to the outside.
There's this innocence to it and this romanticism of them being outside of everything. They are at a certain economic status, they're on the poverty line, they're disenfranchised, but also because of that, they have this freedom. They're not tied to the system in the same way, have this sense of possibility of we can go anywhere. They have this deep longing for this sense of freedom and home, but it started within the home for them. The home was a place where that trauma began. Marion, you find that her mother is an eater. Lee, he ate his father. And I think that leads us full circle, that there's this trauma underlying like America that it can't escape. And it comes back to continually haunt it.
The film is really, I mean, again, the tradition I think the film is trying to tie itself into. It's a thematically a bipolar landscape, a literal, but also a figurative and emotional landscape in this film. On the one hand, you have these desolate spaces, you have the nomadic, lonely, alienated figures who can't integrate themselves into society, and you have ghostliness and consumption and death. But on the other hand, in transition, you also in these heartland spaces, you also have great lyric, sublime beauty. So again, I'm thinking of Malik's Badlands. I'm thinking of the moonlit farm sequence in an old comedy like It Happened One Night, where the two characters almost kissed. There's this promise of a new American Eden that comes out for a moment in these transitional, usually outdoor moments in the film. But of course, those have to end. You can't be in transition forever. Or if you are, you're eventually going to end up like Sully, who again is eventually driven mad by the life he has to lead.
Like you mentioned, the music, how lyrically like beautiful the music is. Trent Reznor co-wrote it with Atticus Ross, and he did a song for it featured in the film, which is called "You Made It Feel Like Home Again." So again, home is very much a theme of the movie, and yeah, home is a place they want to find. It's a place of freedom and peace and love and connection. That's home. But home is where the trauma started from for them. And I think that's what I was saying about the embedded social commentary comes into play a little bit when I think about it, because I have to ask myself, is this congenital? Is this cannibalism? Are they born with it? Or was it created through their circumstances and the environment in which they were born into? Because you learn each one of them, or most of the characters who are eaters, they all had an eater in their family who, at least literally with Lee's character, his dad tried to eat him. So that could have equally had an effect on him. That's not biological.
It's strongly implied throughout in the settings and the way that the elements of Americana are played up, that there is something here that is environmental and cultural. It has to do very much with the fact that this is an American space, and this is an American malady we're witnessing here. And on the level of congenitalness and whether or not it's something that characters are born with, at least one of the cannibals in the film is a cannibal by choice. They meet these two cannibals on the road, remember, and one of them is an apprentice cannibal who's actually become a cannibal by choice. He doesn't suffer from this existential necessity of consuming people. It's something he's done under the wing of the other eater. It's strongly implied again that those two are probably lovers. So we have the idea of queerness coming into the film again. But that this is a life that you can choose, and then at least one character does choose it. So in that case, with that character, clearly no better alternative presented itself. He's not somebody who had to choose the nomadic cannibal lifestyle, and yet here he is.
Yeah, I actually forgot that scene where that's introduced, that he was trained, had a cannibal in training.
And again, not an eater, a cannibal by choice.
Yeah, yeah. And it does deconstruct kind of the sense of the homeland in a way, because these things, this trauma is introduced through, family and the home. And for me, there was kind of an incestuous aspect to it with you had the sexual underpinnings, but also just eating, like your dad or one of your family members. Marin, her journey eventually takes her in search of her mom. Her mom went insane as well, just like Sully, and winds up in an insane asylum. She finds her, and her mom is played by Chloe Sevigny, who I didn't recognize.
Virtually unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then looked her up, and it's like, oh wait, that's Chloe Sevigny. But her mom, when she finds her, has cannibalized her own arms. Her mom doesn't have arms anymore, her hands, because she's eaten them evidently. So her mom just attacks her, and so again, like with the idea of family and the home and this generational trauma passed down through the family, and then the idea of cannibalism, the theme of cannibalism, that you're cannibalizing someone, and when it's a family member, there's that sense that you want to like absorb the person into yourself in a way, in this like incestuous way, become them, this narcissistic underpinning to a parent, like a parent's narcissism towards their children, where they don't want them to lead separate lives, or They want to consume them, absorb them back into themselves, and literally by eating them in this film.
Yeah, I wonder about how self-conscious the treatment of Marin's parents is by Guadagnino. Of course, Guadagnino is a European man, um, white, and yet Marin is biracial, the product of a biracial relationship, and you have the black father on the one hand, who's a kind of protector and keeper at first, but then eventually does abandon her, and he can't do it anymore. She's gonna have to make her own way. But contrasting him and the fact that he at least, he does say he hopes she gets better, but he doesn't make that decision for her. She has to make her own way, but he doesn't decide that she needs to be put out of her misery, for instance. Versus the white mother, who has definitely decided that if she ever sees her daughter again, that she's gonna mercy kill her, and in fact, in the meanwhile, has been cannibalizing herself. It's symbolically a really interesting idea when you consider the invocations of race and gender there. And if Chloe Sevigny is a symbolically freighted character, racially speaking, what does that say about a white America that is gone mad and is in the process of cannibalizing itself, may end up cannibalizing Black America, Black female America specifically, if they get in the way? So even though this film is sort of a period piece in a lot of ways, it also, I think, speaks very much to some of the conversations we're still having, right? About whither white America, and is there a place for Black people in this country still, and Black women, Black girls in particular.
Yeah, you have relationships in the film, and there's a sense of taboo around still. Like there's an interracial marriage, and I mean that the trauma there is regarding the mother who's gone insane, but that sense of a white mother, just the visualization of a white mother attacking her Black daughter or biracial daughter in the film,
Mm.
uh, race is an element there. I mean, you can't divorce race from that scene. It's there, even though it's not directly stated in the movie. And in the same way, back to that scene of homoeroticism between Lee and the carnival worker, and the fact that that carnival worker is leading a shadow life as a queer man, that he's hiding from his family.
Mm.
It's not
Yeah,
acceptable.
the eaters are not the only others in this American space.
Queer men, women, queer individuals were treated as freaks, monsters in the same way.
Yeah, and also I mean I think in the film too, you get this idea that there isn't really communities as such anymore. Everyone in that film is lonely. I mean, the eaters have a special plight. Their status as marginalized others is singular in the film, and yet I can't think of any time that community really shows itself in that film. Any kind of community. There's a blinking moment there where when Lee and Marin decide that they're going to try to actually make a go of it and have a normal life and live together, and ooh, is something like a community coming together now. But we don't have that. I think one of the saddest parts of the film is that the way it's invoking a lot of different generic trajectories. And I think this is a film that desperately wants to be a comedy. I mean, it's a film that really wants to give the characters that natural flourishing, that happy ending, so that they can come into being in this fully realized, happy, satisfied, mutually loving way. And the film doesn't give us that; it snatches that out from under us at the end.
Can we still empathize with someone who's defined as other or a freak? And let's use the conceit of the most extreme premise. They're a cannibal.
Hmm.
I think it is trying to put, monstrosity on a spectrum, that
Yeah.
monstrosity is not something other. It's something within the homeland, within the family. And
Hmm.
that's what makes it a horror film, because that's what a horror
Hmm.
film do. They present something as monstrous and other at first, and then show that monstrosity to be a mirror of ourselves.
On the level of otherness and who we can have empathy for and who we can't, that's the one exception I take with the film. Again, concerns the Sully character and the contrast that's drawn between the two leads and him. Because when I think about what the differences are between them, at first there really aren't meaningful differences. The film has to force meaningful differences. So Sully eventually stalks her. He eventually kills Lee's sister. These things make him untouchable. But at first, he's no different from them. He's just older. He's been driven insane by loneliness, and he's not attractive. So it's like
Yeah,
we can have empathy for you if you're young and hot, but we can't have empathy for you if you're old and not. And there's a kind of the most unsettling specter for me at a certain point becomes the specter of the kind of fascism of the American cult of beauty, which dictates that if you have a pretty enough face or you can fit yourself into this on trend paradigm of beauty and aestheticism, then there is promise, there is hope for you. But if you're old and withered and you just look like everybody else, there's no hope for you.
yeah, I can see that. I mean, I think that is a running thing in Hollywood films where they'll make a serial killer hot and then, oh, he's sexy, he's appealing. Let's cast Timothée Chalamet and as a cannibal, and then that'll make it palatable for the audience.
And of course, I'm describing not just a problem for this film. This is a problem with film as
Oh
such,
yeah,
and probably
yeah,
not just
yeah.
American film.
I think what differentiates his character, although he's very similar, is that he kind of forces himself on Marin.
Oh, he
Uh,
doesn't kind of force himself at the end,
he and
right?
then literally by the end of it, it's almost like he's about to rape her. But in the beginning, even there's this, or he's this predatory, um, like narcissistic, predatory, uh, controlling aspect to his character, where he's not there to develop a relationship with her. He wants control over her, and
That's certainly eventually true. Yeah.
despite his talk of like wanting to bond, you feel like that's the last thing you want to do, buddy. You want to have complete control over her and ownership. And when she rejects him, he shows his true colors.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, that character experiences, a transition, a definite transition. I
Yeah,
do think that there's a little more ambiguity in the beginning. I mean, his motives are never pure, right? I mean, there's a reason he tracked her down and then mentors her after his fashion. I mean, he wants company,
yeah,
right? So, I mean, initially, at least, his only crime is that he's lonely. Um, and can we really fundamentally blame someone for being lonely?
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, and I see where you're getting at there because that's existential dilemma faced by all the characters that he's facing, and yet he's the one who's vilified at the end of the movie, whereas the film is still having that kind of romanticism around the love story with the young characters.
hmm.
You get the
And
sense.
I buy into it for the most part, right? I mean, I think what the film does with them is beautiful, that there is a kind of symbolic triumph in that sense, that they fall in love with each other. They've been there for each other. They've been kind of a home to each other. I wanted to ask you what you think about the title and the idea of bones and all, because again, those two cannibals they meet on the road, they provide the source of the title, where there's this ritualistic, this rite of passage that you have eventually where you actually consume a person bones and all, which is apparently like, how would that even work mechanically, logistically? Um, and it's almost like, is that what is going to happen? Is Marin going to consume Lee bones and all at the end of the film? Is that what's
Yeah,
about? Is this going to be her rite of passage? And is this the ultimate kind of idealistic moment where you consume another person, but this one is like kind of like a ritualistic expression of some kind of ultimate longing and loving?
yeah. I think, like you said, that it plays into this, sense of love and longing. Like there's that love connection behind those words. Bones and all, it's almost an oxymoron because bones is like treating you as a piece of meat, a thing. And that sense of all entirety is like, I want the whole person, so you're treating, on the one hand, they're treating their victims as just a meat to feed their need, but then there's all sorts of other layers to it where it's a sexual experience. It's a way for them to connect with others in this horrifying way. And so that's
Mhm.
a very intimate moment. It's like a lovemaking scene between the two. There's that other dark side to it that's introduced with those cannibals you mentioned, where there's this ritualistic aspect to it, this dark ritualistic aspect to it, where they're treating their prey as just things to absorb and consume. So that's
Mhm.
there's that element of just hunger and consumption and violent consumption behind it in this need to consume too that's driving that. So I think the title just has a lot of layers to it. I'm not sure if I could pin down exactly one thing that it is intended by it, but I think all those things come into play: the theme of cannibalism, connection, love, having a love connection, and wanting that acceptance.
But within the context of something that really is fundamentally forbidden. I think maybe the strong implication of the film is that love is forbidden. Love is its own
Uh,
monstrosity.
yeah. Huh, interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was, I thought it was an amazing movie. I was this
It makes me
enthralled.
want to go and watch his other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember we watched Suspiria and
Hmm.
had a mixed reaction to it, but I
It's
wasn't
not
in
as
love
good as
with,
this one.
yeah, I wasn't in love with
This is
Suspiria,
better.
but I definitely, I think I'll give that one a rewatch and explore his other filmography because this was just a stunning movie. Yeah.
He's done at least a couple of romances, just straight romances. No pun intended with straight, obviously.
Oh, really? Okay.
Um, yeah, so I want to watch those because it'd be nice to see him actually do a love story that actually gives his queer characters an undiluted happy ending.
Yeah.
We'll see if he actually does that. I mean, I don't know.
And it was a breath of fresh air to see a movie also just in terms of his camera work, and that I see so many films that have such a quick editing style, and I'm so aware of like the filmmaking apparatus, and the style takes over. I love how like naturalistic and raw and real this movie feels throughout it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ironic things is that these characters are placeless. They don't have a place of their own. And yet the film just gives us such a strong sensual sense of place because like you said, the cinematography really lets the world breathe. It lets you in. It gives you a sense of that dimensionality, and it gives you a sense of each of the places that they're inhabiting. And it's not just cycling you through the typical kind of like tropes of um, hyper reality, these very quick cutting styles and
Yeah.
the constantly moving camera.
It was a breathtaking, beautiful, mesmerizing experience. And as ugly as the subject matter and themes were and disturbing, I mean, I'm totally on the same level with you. It's so beautiful and lyrical and poetic.
It's the kind of film that you don't get to see very often, especially nowadays. But I mean, it's always been rare to see a film that really kind of gives you that true cinematic payoff where you feel like you really had an experience watching it.
Yeah, yeah. Give me a lot of respect for Timothée Chalamet.
Hmm.
I think I underrated him, and now I can see why, he's reached kind of the stardom he has. But I think this film particularly showcased the way he can just immerse himself in the character.
Yeah, no, I mean, I put him in I mean, I think that performance fits in with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, Martin Sheen in Badlands. I think he's a great American outsider, and I think he really sells it.
Yeah, yeah. Same with the lead actress, Taylor
Yeah,
Russell.
she was excellent too. She doesn't have Chalamet's star power, but but she was every bit as good as he was.
All right, that wraps up today's discussion. And yeah, let us know if you've seen Bones and All, and share your thoughts and opinions on it. We'd love to hear about it. And if you like the video, we'd love it if you hit the like button and subscribed. And yeah, we're gonna keep this series going. It's a lot of fun for us to do, and just to get together and talk movies. Yeah, since we were kids, we've been huge film buffs, so this is just like, it's a joy to be able to just set aside the time to just choose a movie and watch it and be able to just get deep into it.
For sure.
All right, well, yeah, we'll see you next time here.